Hmm. Hi, everyone. This is take 2 of the Death Chicks. We're here today with our big question series, and we had little technical difficulties, so my co-host Patty Burgess and our other guests should be joining us shortly. But for now, we thank you for being here, our live audience who switched over. And I'm going to introduce Jane Duncan Rogers. Jane is from Scotland, and she is the best-selling author of the book Gifted by Grief. So Jane, let's go ahead and jump in. How do we prepare for death?
How do we prepare for death? That really is a big question, isn't it? When I saw that, I thought, right, okay, this is perfect for me because
very good.
Hey, Patty, we're live.
Hey, oh, okay, we're live. Hello. I saw Suzette trying to get in touch.
Jane is jumping in, so we'll just
keep going.
Okay, fine, that's fine. My husband died about 4 years ago, and I published a book last year called Gifted by Grief about the whole process that had happened. But how that's relevant to this particular question is that before he died, we had been sent an email by a Californian friend saying there's a lot of questions here that you really must make sure that Philip answers before he dies. And they were specific, really specific things like how do you want your body to be dressed? What do you want to have happen after you have died? Where are your passwords? And what do you want done with your social media account? Things like that, really practical. And not easy questions to answer if you know that you're going to be dying sooner than later. But we did answer them, and after he died, I was just so grateful that we had done that and that we had had the courage to do that, and particularly Philip, because it was so helpful for me to know, when grief hits you, it hits you with a slam, and you can't. One of the symptoms of it is that you can't think straight. So to be able to go to this list that we had answered the questions of was wonderful. And so my take now is with people who are actually, one of the results of my book is that people have said this is what they're interested in. They want to do their own list. They want to answer the questions for themselves. So I'm now facilitating that, and that's my very practical take on how do we prepare for death. I mean, I could go in all sorts of other directions as well, but this is the one that I'm responding to at the moment. So, yeah, that's my idea about how you prepare for dying.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jane. I think it's great. It's so practical. Yeah, we'll dive into that more later. Suzette, what's your take on this question? How do we prepare for death?
Well, I would say it is about the word preparing, and the first step is talking about it. And I think that we're right now in this cultural movement where we're seeing people wanting to talk about it, and at some point we're going to hit a tipping point where you're going to see the masses want to talk about it. But right now we're in the earlier days of it. And that sometimes you can have a family, the person who's dying and all the family members completely don't want to talk about it. I have a friend who lost her mother, and she said to me, both my father and I, she's an only child, we just couldn't talk to her about it because we just didn't want to lose her. And my mom wanted to talk to us about everything. So there's a bit of opening that conversation. That is the most critical thing, I think, to getting that going. And it's never too soon to prepare. You could start now when you're perfectly healthy, quite frankly, making decisions on various aspects. But I think that right now within this cultural movement, there's this threshold in terms of a terminal illness, assuming that you have time to prepare. Not everybody does. And sometimes it's a very lengthy period, sometimes it's a short period. And so it's a question of at what point are you willing to accept the person who's dying and the family members that there's a possibility you're going to die, or accepting the fact that you've given up and you're accepting it, and starting to look at what are all these options. And I think, the boomers want to be empowered with their choices.
Yes.
And so being informed is a really big thing. And as we know with Jane, her experience, and just so much of what's going on out there is having access and finding out what that information is. And you're seeing that on the internet. More and more people are web searching, wanting to know these answers. And I think with the internet, it'll also allows, or books, an opportunity to just sit and start to read and make decisions and think about things. So.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, I think that is interesting, this opening of the conversation. There's no doubt about that. And I think, to me, that's an essential part of preparing for death, because how do you even know where to go if you can't communicate those needs, those wants, those issues? So that sort of begs the question for me, how would you, I think the people who are not afraid are the ones that are Googling and reading the books and all of that kind of thing. This is kind of like a two-part question. How would you reach out to those folks that are going to experience death in some way, their own, somebody else, a loved one, who are not Googling? What's happening there, and what do you think is going on with them that they're not interested? Is it head in the sand? Is it too busy? What is that, and how would you propose a reach out to those folks, if there is such a thing, or maybe they just have to come to it? I don't know what your thoughts are on that. So, Jane, you want to, or Suzanne, go ahead, that's fine.
No, let Jane.
Okay, let Jane.
Okay.
Go ahead, you guys take it away.
Well, I think actually Suzette was hitting the nail on the head there, because it is about conversation, and a conversation can be just a sentence. Like, I was speaking to my sister the other day. My mum and dad are still alive, and they are both, well, particularly my mum, happy to talk about their death, wanting to make sure that they've organized things for it and all that sort of stuff. Now, my sister doesn't feel like that. She can't bear the thought of them dying. But just because I occasionally am dropping a sentence in here or there or whatever, she is very slowly coming to terms with the fact that it is going to happen. And, that is great, because it does happen, and all sorts of circumstances happen out of the blue. Children die, babies die, people die suddenly, people take a long time to die, and if even in tiny small ways little seeds have been planted in an ordinary conversation by somebody who is confident about it, then when it happens to a close family member or to a friend, then you can be just that little bit extra prepared. So that's what I would be encouraging. It's like people like us doing this sort of thing, talking to people who are like on this show. Obviously, I guess people are interested in it, but there'll be loads more people not quite interested. And it's our job, really, everybody who's here and listening, it's our job in a way to find a way in an ordinary conversation just to say, even to ask the question, how do you feel about dying?
Right.
Just to ask it.
It's brilliant, Jane. And one of our viewers, and this is both a woman, Patty and I love, Sherry Bilal. She asked a great question last week that we didn't get to, and it was, I think you may have answered it, Jane, but that was, how do we bring death into everyday conversations? And really, that's what the Death Chicks are about, because it is something that happens, and for whatever reason, people are afraid to talk about it. It's one part of life, the one part of life we can count on, yet we're afraid to look at or talk about. Sometimes we say, I think Patty said this, we spend more time thinking about and planning for our next car or our house than we do about our own death, and it's one of the most major things that will happen. So thanks for bringing that up, Jane. Suzette, do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, I feel like right now we're in a transition period. So my parents are in their mid-80s, and that's really a generation that really doesn't want to talk about it as a rule of thumb. And in fact, their viewpoint is pretty much, I want to go to sleep and never wake up. And we're seeing this shift of not only talking about it, but this idea of conscious dying that came about in the 60s. Which is this idea of not only accepting it, but how can you enhance that process? How can you heal? Gives you time to have conversations. Is there a spiritual component? And so I think that we're going to have more of a shift of literally, I don't know, for me personally, I want to know when I'm dying. Like, that's a big event in my life. versus going to sleep and never waking up. I know my grandfather, and this is like 12 years ago, he woke up and his private nurse called and said he's dying. He wanted to know he was dying. I know my grandfather. He was like, and so he was sort of early in that curve. I could see that back then. They were very much, impacted me in that way. So I think that's a really good thing, because it gives you an opportunity to do so many more things in reflecting and engaging, and what do you want to have that will ease that process for you? There's a lot there, actually, and we're going to see more and more coming forward, I think, in terms of that process.
It's interesting you say that generationally. I think there is such a huge difference. The boomers want to know. I know when it came with my parents, if they were both alive today, they would be early 90s. So my mom died at 88, my dad at 79. And interestingly enough, my dad was an attorney who took care of people's wills and estates and all of that kind of thing. But do you think that he wanted to talk about his own? Absolutely not. And certainly not to his children. I can't say that he didn't talk to a degree about my mom, but I think that was more of my mom pretty much surmising, I know what your father would want, versus a very clear statement of that. Yet he'd be the first one to say, look at people dying, and if they'd only come to me for a will. It was more about business, So I find generationally that is so true. Now, my mom was pretty progressive. I think she was definitely one, and especially, I think if my dad was the one that was left, he'd be talking more. But since he knew that he was predeceasing my mom, and my mom was more of the talker, say from the heart, that we probably would be okay and work that out. And towards the end, even the last 3 days, she was still telling me where to find certain things in the house to make sure that I got them out, because her father, like my mother, would hide money all over the place in different books, and you'd open books and dollars would come flying out, because she was, someone of the Depression. So it was important for her to talk about it, being of that generation, but I think so many were cloaked behind. I know my father was behind the newspaper. He was like that dad of the 50s who wasn't going to talk. That was sort of mom's business. But you also mentioned something else about spirituality, and I find this is the most amazing journey towards personal growth that one could take. What do you all think about that?
Can I just add one thing real quick that we haven't mentioned is there are tools to open the conversation that are out there. There's the Go Wish cards. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, which is a deck of cards, much like Go Fish, except Go Wish. There's the Gift of Grace cards that are out there now. There's the Conversation Project, which is an online website that has some steps that you can go through. So there are also tools where if you really, really are uncomfortable and you just want some kind of an aid to kind of kickstart things, that's another option. I just wanted to toss that out there.
Yeah, very, very good.
And also, I'm sure you have the death cafes over there. Do you have the death cafes?
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's another. Yep.
Yes, I think those kind of venues do bring on people who are somewhat curious anyway. I did go to a death cafe locally here recently, and I was really thrilled to find a woman, an older woman, who said that she had been terrified to talk about it, and she had heard about these death cafes and thought that it would be a gentler way and in safety to talk about it. But that to me also took someone who was very aware of her own limitations, very self-aware of her own limitations, and I don't know if everybody is. What I find sometimes is the best preparation for death, having worked in the hospice industry and then seeing the families or people who want to take care afterwards, is sadly either a not so great death or a very good death. People then want to come back out and talk about the experience of, this was horrific, and I know it can be different, and they get to start the conversation, sometimes leading with fear, but carrot, stick, some people respond differently. And then those folks who have had an amazing experience, somebody like me, an amazing experience with a dear friend who was passing, changed my life and brought me into this particular path. So sometimes we kind of have to wait till after the fact then for those loved ones to begin to prepare for death, and I think that's certainly what happened to me. Do you find people coming to you out of curiosity, both out of curiosity or because they had some experience, would you say?
For me, I think both. Like today, I was talking to somebody who had read my book, thought the list of questions that I put in the appendix at the back was really good, and then told me that she had done them. However, she hadn't done them until her husband had had to have a coronary bypass, and they actually were suddenly having to face up to the fact that he could just die at any time. And that was enough of an impetus for them, the two of them, to sit and talk together about actually what they wanted to do and to introduce the idea of both of their deaths to their children, who actually were open to it as well. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, when it hits you personally, when you get brushed by death in some way, then whether it's your own death or a close friend's death or an illness or something like that, then you get opened up whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And not everybody can respond to that opening, but a lot more people, like Suzette was saying, in the boomer generation, a lot more people are open to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is why we're seeing this kind of I was going to say explosion. Maybe it's a kind of quiet explosion at the moment, mm-hmm. but it'll probably get quite noisy, hopefully quite soon.
Well, and those of us in the boomers are going to be noisy because a lot of us are going to be doing it at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this might be, you know, just what we need to really wake people up to dying, and there is the Wake Up to Dying project. We hope to have that guest return with us soon. But yeah, it's almost like we need a big explosion, or we need something to happen to wake people up, because the reason Patty and I are here doing this show is not because we're obsessed with death, but because we have such a passion for life. And we've both had the experience that when we really look at death and accept it, our whole life changes. It's almost like a shift or a hurdle that once you're over it, your life changes. So really, it's a great opportunity, and that's why we're exploring it. And part of preparing for it is simply facing the fear. If you're walking around with a fear, thinking, I don't want to think about it, that's one fear that you have in your life that you don't have to have. And like any fear, mostly when you stop, sit down, take a deep breath, and look at it in the face, and invite it to sit on your lap and become friends with it, it's not so big and scary after all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Jane, just I'm curious. You may have covered this while I was trying to get back onto this particular link here, this show. But what's probably one of the biggest questions on your list that people say, "Oh wow, I really got to look at," or I want to explore?
That's a good question. It tends to be the things that you don't. That are so close to you don't think about. Like on my last course, one lady who had actually done quite a lot of this, she is living with a life-threatening illness, and so her death in a way is imminent, so she had done quite a lot of that, but she had completely forgotten about her kitten. She didn't know what was going to happen to her kitten, and so I mean that is something you think that you would imagine that you would deal with, you know, but she hadn't done that. Are there other questions? Particularly for an older generation, and I'm working with people who are my age or a little bit older, mostly, they will have a social media presence, probably not that much, but they haven't necessarily thought at all about how that might get dealt with or what they want to have done. That will change as we get more and more used to the fact that actually people on Facebook and all the other sites actually do die as well, and I think that's getting taken care of now by some of the different sites. But so what else? There's a lot of interest in the different ways that you can actually take care of a body, and once people can make that separation from who they are to a body, then they can explore that without getting incredibly emotional about it. might have to go through the emotion first, like Misty was saying.
Mm-hmm.
But so, for example, we had a talk locally a couple of months ago with a green burial owner who pointed out that you don't actually have to be in a coffin. You can be wrapped in a shroud. The shroud could be of anything that you liked. You do have to be balanced on a flat surface of some kind, which he demonstrated of a local person here who does willow caskets and willow coffins, had made a flat tray sort of thing in the shape of a body that the body goes on, and then it's lowered into the ground. And people just didn't know about that sort of thing. So being able to find out about that then enables them to have some kind of choice. So yeah, those kinds of things.
Interesting. And Suzette, I'm curious, because being out in California, I would think that the green burial movement or home funerals might be of particular interest, because we always look to California and then it moves east and we say, wow. And same thing with Canada. If it moves east and up, then you never know. What's happening there with regard to that?
Well, it's interesting because the reason I moved out here from the Midwest was because I was interested in this topic, and this is 2001. Marin County actually has which is here in the San Francisco Bay Area, has the largest cremation rate in the country. So to me, it was the most progressive area. But I went to Portland for a death conference, and Portland's a little bit ahead of us in terms of that curve. But I think one of the things that I find, because I get a lot of emails and phone calls of people coming at me, one of the most uncomfortable things for people is, what do I say to somebody, a friend or family member who has somebody who's terminally ill? I think that's one of the most common difficulties that happen. And then I would say the next step is probably what to ask, because we're doing this and we're so deep into this topic. Most people will say to me over and over again, what's green burial? What's a natural burial? A home funeral? Like, this is so foreign to the average person out there, even though for us this is just like we understand this inside out and backwards. Very true. And one of the limitations of the internet is that people don't know what to search, literally. They have a limited understanding of what death is about because we aren't fully talking about it yet. So that's one of the things that I think is the greatest challenge to all of us that just enjoy this. It's important to us. We're passionate about it. We have this great knowledge base, and we want to extend that to people. And I think that's the challenge is educating people.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're doing right now, that people will find you on the internet and listen to this and learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully that's the case. And it's interesting.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Miss.
Oh, I just wanted to say, everyone, just as a big shout out, we are trying to get more followers on Google+, so if you're listening and if you like what you hear, please go Google us, and on our Google+ page hit the follow button. So, we haven't been asking people to do that. We kind of forgot that part, but it does help get the word out, so thanks, Suzette.
It does. That's true. That's a great reminder.
So I'm going to also add that there's been a lot of emails flying around right now. The National Home Funeral Alliance, that is a national organization that is educating. They train. They don't certify. Anybody that's interested in having a home funeral or doing natural death care, which is keeping the body at home. So right now there's legislation that's happening in Virginia. And he is a senator who is also a funeral director and is basically writing in to prevent families from keeping the body unless it's refrigerated after 48 hours. Well, what's interesting is that this isn't really new. I just found out from the Funeral Consumer Alliance, their national organization, there's already, like 40%, of states already have similar types of laws in place. So I think going forward, as we culturally change, and we're going to have this movement, and I think this idea of home funerals, natural death care, whether you want to have a funeral at home, or in my case, because I know I won't, it's going to be more about my having that opportunity to be with my parents for the length of time before I feel like I'm ready to go. I'm just not going to pick a phone up and call, like, come get the body. It is going to be very kind of a contrary and opposed to funeral directors and what they're trying to do in terms of the shift, to kind of hang on to what they have as the lay of their land right now, and that's understandable. So it's going to be really interesting going forward, I think, and it's already happening, but it's kind of under the radar because so few people really understand or know about their option for home funerals. But I think it's going to be a huge growing movement. Huge. That's what I predict on that.
Absolutely. And I think, back to that education and information again, because I was watching a video about, embalming the body and how that is so not necessary. And yet, apparently that came about, after like World War II, when pretty much all of, death care was going outside of the house. And so you have all these expenses, you have all of these things that now kind of sanitizes death from us and brings it over into the realm of the funeral parlor, the funeral home. And when you look at the economic motivation sometimes behind legislation, it makes sense, because that's going to really change the business of funeral homes and what everybody kind of expects going in and picking the casket. You expect embalming, you don't even think about that, but that's not even necessary. Just like you were saying that, you could be buried in a shroud if that's what you want, but as consumers, and that's what I love about the Funeral Consumers Alliance. I went to a local meeting, board meeting of the folks here, and all of the things that even us in the death movement don't understand, and some of the reasons why these new emerging kinds of traditions and practices are taking place. It's mind-blowing what can be done now, and how would you know if you don't even know what to Google, Suzette, as you said?
So I just want to add, for people who are coming to this and don't know, the Funeral Consumer Alliance, they're a national organization of volunteers around the country, and they've been around for decades and decades, and they basically help inform and protect consumers when shopping for funeral goods and services. We have a Federal Trade Commission law in this country. It's very lengthy, actually, to protect consumers, and most people don't know about it. So that's just one, item that going forward in the United States that, people wanting to talk about this can empower themselves with and utilize that organization. There's a lot of resources. And I don't know for you, Jane, what might be happening on your end.
Well, in the UK, it's unusual to do embalming. So it can happen, but it's not a normal thing. There's quite a lot of resources around for alternative ways of doing funeral, but it's definitely growing. But the best one for people in the UK, I would say, is the Natural Death Centre. I think it's the naturaldeathcentre.org. It's got loads of information there about all sorts of things that you wouldn't even imagine asking. So that's definitely a good resource to start with, because I know it's different in different counties, obviously, the same as it's different in different states. But yeah, that's a really good place to start. And I would really encourage people to start now, even before they think they're going to die or you've got an illness or anything like that. Now is the time, even though it's one of those things that you put off, and but I still would say explore, and even if you don't take action, just explore for the hell of it. Right. I mean, I've always been interested in death, as a concept, even when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by when I buried, the very first animal that I buried was a blackbird that had died in our garden, and I dug a little grave for it and I buried it, and I had a little ceremony, and I was only about probably 8 or 9 at that time. So it's and you were mentioning earlier about the spiritual side of things, Patty, and I thought, in a way, I'm not sure that one can really embrace the spiritual without including death. Life includes death. We tend to think of them as opposites, but they're not opposites at all. There is life, and part of life is death and rebirth and growing again, etc., etc. We look everywhere and we see that in nature. And yet, when we look to ourselves, it's like it's a disaster if we die, sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we look at them as, you know, light and dark, death and life, and it's not true. It's not true. It's all part of that.
Right.
What you said reminded me of, you know, burying a blackbird, and of the animals that I've buried in my life. I always got a shoebox, or I got some padding. I created their own little coffin, and here to know, I didn't even need to do any of that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I really like the part in Jane's book where she talks about the body. You know, there's the body, and then there's the person, and I think you mentioned it on this interview here, Jane, where we are not our bodies. You know, we are more than our bodies. Our body is simply our vessel that this life form, however you imagine that to be, it resides within. And it was especially touching to read when your husband Philip had died, and you knew that it was just a body. And I think that really speaks loudly to the spiritual connection and the spiritual beings that we are.
Yeah, because I knew that idea intellectually. I mean, actually, I thought I knew it at all levels. And when I saw him die in front of my eyes, and I had even in that moment had to say to myself, that's not Philip. You know, it looks exactly like him. It didn't look any different from just a few moments ago, and yet it was completely different. So different, I completely lost interest in the body at that point. I did go back. I left the room and I went back in again. And about 5 minutes later, just to sort of check that it had all happened. But he was lying there. Well, I say he was lying there, but actually there was a dead body lying there, and it was nothing to do with him. And I took care of it because I had to take care of it, you know. But not because I was interested, not because it was him. He wasn't there any longer. And I think when you're really clear that whoever it is that we are isn't anything to do with this body, even though it appears that way, it's a lot easier then to talk about death, to talk about other people's death, to talk about your own death. It doesn't mean that the grief is any less. It doesn't mean that you feel any less, but it is much easier to embrace it into life. That's my experience anyway.
Wonderful, wonderful. Suzette, any thoughts too as we are? Missy, I don't know if you were going to start us wrapping up.
That was really beautiful.
Thinking about it, I do want to hear what Suzette has to say, and then I'm just going to bring something in regarding Suzanne, who's unfortunately Suzanne O'Brien, our death doula, who was going to be here today. She's been having great difficulties getting in, so I just want to say I'm sorry she couldn't make it. But Suzette, I'll let you comment on that, and then we'll start wrapping up.
Yeah, that was really beautiful, Jane, and I've noticed that it really does vary. You know, you had that experience, and I had a friend who, when his wife died, he said it took them 2.5 hours to come get her body, you know, and yet there's other people that I've heard of people keeping a body for over a week, you know, so I think it depends on what that process is for each person. I mean, the truth is, and I think that's the most significant aspect of what's happening now, is whatever you feel is okay. You know, my nephew died unexpectedly, and my brother, I have 2 brothers, and my one brother was there first, and then when his father, my other brother, showed up, my younger brother was there to kind of let him know and talk with him, and the physician said, "Do you want to go in and see your son?" to my older brother, my middle brother, and he turned to my younger brother and said, "No, I don't want to. Is that wrong?" And he felt obligated. He felt obligated to go in there, and yet my younger brother told me, I wanted to go see him. I wanted to see him. So everybody has this different reaction of how you handle things, and you know, wanting to see that body or not, or so. And I think that's the kind of wonderful part of all this is, as we open these conversations and these kinds of forums are happening more and more, and the information and the books and the websites. People are going to start feeling more comfortable with whatever it is that they feel, you know, is okay. Yeah.
Very good point. Not channeling people into a particular way that's the right way, because there is no right way to grieve, to believe, to care for. To me, it's all just reverence for whatever that feeling and whatever emerges from that. Absolutely.
And I think
Very wise.
And I think physicians are going to start to feel more comfortable. It's going to take them a bit. They're already starting to write about it and think. But I think that as well going forward, because they're having to manage people in a different way than family members.
And fascinatingly, too, starting, I think it was January 1 of this year, they were beginning to pay physicians, Medicare was, being able to pay physicians to be able to have those conversations. I was just reading something from Atul Gawande on Twitter this morning, and he was a little bit more self-exposed and aware about how difficult it is for many doctors to have these conversations. We think of them as though they really should, but they don't. Their whole approach is in maintaining life, not in letting go of life. And so it's just so interesting to see that even Medicare believes, that is, our healthcare system, I know in Canada and UK it's different, that is really key to getting people to start really pulling their worlds together when it comes to end-of-life care and wishes, and so that it can be a much more smooth transition, because many times doctors are involved in those kinds of things, or what do they do when they're at odds, or families are at odds as to what needs to be done, and that can be devastating, I think, to a family, to the patient, and certainly to hospital systems who take on great liability for these things. So it is beginning to bring in this whole larger context, not just the individual, the person who's died, but systems as well, this conversation.
Well, the same thing with the PULSed. I don't know if you're aware that the PULSed form, which is almost in all states, physician-ordered life-sustaining treatment. It's for when you're critically ill, and it's just a one-page, two-sided, just to make decisions literally at end of life. So that they just passed a law. It's in this country that physicians, it used to be only physicians could sign, and now RNs and physician assistants can sign it. So that opens the conversation in terms of, and I've heard from RNs, they spend more time with people when they're done. They really have more of a connection with the family members, because the physicians just come in and go as a rule of thumb. I'm not saying they never have a connection, but so I think we're kind of starting to open our hospital systems. We're starting to see some big changes in terms of legislation.
Well, we absolutely are, and I think that's key. Whoever spends the most time, sorry, Misty, I apologize, whoever spends the most time, which is what we found in our hospice series, even our nurses' aides who will not have that privilege of signing or that ability or authority, but the more time somebody spends with the person who's dying, oftentimes that's the person who gets the information as to what those wishes are at the end of life. So we have to consider all that as well.
And I think it's really great that Suzette, you alluded to this, but this whole idea of paradigm change and shifting, and if they're starting to enact legislation that's recognizing more of a need to address these things on the deathbed, then it's, from my perspective, it's only a matter of time where that immediacy starts to expand, and we see the benefit of actually taking care of these things beforehand. So I think it's a first step, and I think it's an indicator that we are moving in the direction that the Death Chicks and many people like yourselves are advocating for. So I want to thank each of you for being on the show. I'd like to give you, I just want to express regrets for Suzanne O'Brien, the death doula from New York City, who tried very hard to get on, and I think she might be leaving some comments in the comment stream if people want to get a hold of her that way. We'll hope to have her on a following show. For now, we'll pass it back to maybe Jane. You can start off just by sharing some more about yourself and what you do and how people can get in touch with you to follow up. And then Suzette, after Jane shares that, please do the same.
Sure. Okay. Yes. Well, I thought that I was going to be helping people who are grieving to get through their grief better, and I do a little bit of that work. But since I've published my book, and so many people have been asking me about creating their own lists of questions that need to be asked and answered, that's what I've been doing more of. So I have some live workshops happening here in the UK, and I will be putting together a pilot online one. You can get hold of the list at giftedbygrief.com/the-list. But if you just want to get on my mailing list and hear about all these exciting things that are going to be happening, then visit giftedbygrief.com and sign up there, or send me an email. It's a slightly different email address. It's jane@wildwisdom.co.uk. So yeah, basically I'm in the business of helping people have conversations about dying, death and grief, and helping them to get much more comfortable with it, because I would like it to become an ordinary topic of conversation in our world and in our daily life, which may or may not happen in my lifetime, but I'm sure as hell going to facilitate it.
Well, you are quite happy. You are a quite happy person and perky to be talking about death, dying, grief, and loss. And I want that to be the message to people, that this is not morose or sorrowful. It can be hugely joyous and hugely rewarding as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and even fun. You can even have fun doing it.
Yes, yes, a lot of laughter. Suzette, we're so glad that you are here. Thank you. Tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, well, so this idea of it being fun, and part of Seven Ponds, the website, is when you get there, the look and feel is very much about transforming this concept of what death is in your mind, and sort of going away from this dark macabre. And that's certainly part of the step of going forward. And so Seven Ponds is a free site to go on, and the real intent is to educate people about what their options out there, and you can probably get a sense of that as I've been talking about that. I'm really a generalist, and that's really what the website is about, and we have a lot of experts on there. We're trying to educate people on who all these people are, what do they do, what are the things that are happening, in legislation, cultural movements, you name it, because people don't know right now, and so that is truly our main aim. And we also do have a planning guide. Speaking of planning, we did some deep research and consulted a lot of experts. So it's a step-by-step, and that's on our website as well. We have a newsletter, because our blog is more of a magazine, and we welcome people. You don't have to give your email or anything to come visit us. So if anybody's interested in asking me a question, my email is suzette@sevenponds.com. You'll see a picture of me in the blog. My email's there as well. And if you'd like to be on our newsletter, just let me know, and I'm happy to put you on the list. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
It was really nice to meet all of you.
Oh, you too, Suzette. You too.
Yeah, great.
So thanks, everyone. One last shout out. If you like what you see, please follow us on Google+. And February is our Big Questions series, and I'll pass it over to Patty, and then we'll head out for the day.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone. And we're going to head off, and we're going to start to explore, and we hope you will too, these big questions about death. So join us next week, where we're going to be talking more about these big questions, and we'll continue that, as Misty said, to the end of the month. So great to see you all, and thanks for coming over to this new little venue we had with our Google Gremlins, but we'll get through it. Thanks, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.